Marina will be moderating. I will be checking out the chat. So
Oh,
if you have questions, put them in the chat and I'll pass them on to the panel.
okay. Okay. So, first of all, I'm delighted that we could do this today. Um, so many times we get into the routine of serving on a board, and sometimes it's necessary to take a step back and really um, get in touch with our core responsibilities again. And also to identify the challenges of being on a board and perhaps what the resources might be to dealing with those challenges. And so that's what motivated the consortium board today to bring together this conversation. So I'm delighted to be able to do that. Um, it's kind of like the process that you go through when you are writing a grant, which I'm sure most of you have done. You write the grant, and it forces you to define who you are and define what you do, and that's a healthy thing to do. So I'm delighted. I'm delighted that we have quite a wonderful panel today. Do some quick introductions. We have Carol Van Kirk. Welcome, Carol.
Hello.
Glad that you're here. Um, Carol has had a very diverse career from what I've seen here. She had advanced degrees in botany, plant pathology, and philosophy, and taught philosophy for 10 years at the university level. Then she moved into technical writing and certain various fields, including telecommunications and pharmaceuticals, and even defense. She has served on quite a range of different nonprofit boards, including being the president of the executive board for the Northeast chapter of Thrivent Financial. This is a major organization. And then she was also on the Monmouth Civic Courses Board of Trustees for several years in various capacities. So, Carol, I think you have a pretty good amount of feed there. That's a pretty good thing, to say the least. With us today also is Bonnie Featherstone Johnson. Welcome, Bonnie, and thank you for being here today. Um, Bonnie is a former member of Monmouth Civic Course and participated in church choirs for many years. But she has made volunteerism a core of her personal mission, I think. She has worked in Red Bank for the Soup Kitchen lunch break and has been on their board of trustees and is now a member of their advisory board. She chaired a capital campaign for them, and where they raised $5 million. So, Bonnie, if you're not busy, just come and see me quickly, okay? That's very good. And she was also a participant in a recent campaign of theirs where they raised $12 million. So that was very exciting. He's also been on the board of 180 Turning Lives Around, which is a very worthy organization helping um, uh, um, uh, victims of domestic abuse and such in Monmouth County. And she currently sits on the foundation of the board of the Visiting Nurse Association. Um, uh, she very wonderfully wrote to me that her personal philosophy is we are all put on this earth to serve. And that is just the most wonderful sentiment because indeed it is service is at the core of any commitment you make. And certainly when you make that greater commitment to shepherd an organization by being involved in its organization and its development. Our third panelist is Mr. Jim Scavone. He has had about just a small amount, 30 years in nonprofit management, and has been a leader handling operations, management, both fiscally and personnel, I think, board development, strategic planning, which we all need to engage in for sure. Um, he has been in a career focused on human and healthcare services and recently retired from operations at Riverview Medical Center. Before that, he was the executive director of Red Bank River Center, the downtown management organization for the business district there, and also worked at Latison Network, which is part of the Cerebral Palsy of Monmouth County, and also was with the Catholic Archdiocese of Chicago. I'm happy to say that Jim is a published composer also, and is presently the president of Monmouth Civic Course, where he served in that same capacity back in the 2000s. So that, I think, is about as clear a life of service as you can get. So thank you, all three of you, for being here today, and for everyone else joining us in this conversation. One of the things that I thought would be important to come to terms with is, what does a board do? And so Richard Ingram wrote a very lovely 2-page paper a few years back, I think about 2009, where he enumerates the 10 basic responsibilities of a nonprofit board. And I think the most obvious one is quite true. To define an organization's mission and purpose. What does this organization do? And certainly every now and then, that mission, I believe, should be revisited, because organizations evolve. And so revisiting that occasionally is good. Obviously, that they need to also reach a consensus and select the chief executive and their executive officers. They have to plan out what the organization is going to do and what are its goals and how are they going to be met. They need to monitor that activity and work to both underwrite and strengthen it. They need to make sure there's the money to make that happen. Because without the financial resources, we all know that nothing is going to take place. So that's important. And in that process, since we're talking about money, that money has to be overseen so that there is indeed an ethical campaign in doing so. They have to also make sure that the organization functions both legally and ethically with a fundamental integrity. That is perhaps sometimes even more of a challenge, but again, it needs to be articulated actively. And then obviously the board is making decisions on how the public is going to understand the mission and understand the accomplishments of a given organization. All of that is part of what a board does. All of that means we need to build a competent board and a cooperative board, and that's what we're trying to define today. So I invite any of our panelists to start the conversation. What criteria do you believe are important in filling a board post? How should a board, a standing board, approach that when there is, for example, someone retiring from a board, where a replacement for that person has to be found? So I invite any of our panelists to chime in.
I'll jump in, Marina. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think, that's such an important question. Obviously, the people we put on our boards are the most important thing we can do to developing an effective board. So I think, number one, we need to make sure that our board members, first and foremost, are supportive and even passionate about that mission and purpose that you spoke about at the beginning. I think that should be the very first criteria in making sure that we're finding the right people for our boards. And then beyond that, I think the board hopefully has job descriptions which list out some of the skills or criteria that you're looking for. And so I think it's important to go back to those always and revisit those, number one, and make sure that they're up to date. And number two, make sure that you're matching those skills and criteria with the people that you're selecting.
Right. I think that's a really important criteria. In other words, certainly finding individuals who are passionate about the organization and about its activities and goals is the bottom line for sure. But just because somebody is passionate about what the board does, about the organization does, doesn't mean they're going to necessarily be a good board member. So um, let's be even more specific about the qualities that we're looking for in a person to be on a board if the board is going to be cooperative. So Carol, can I ask you to comment on that a little bit?
I'm not sure if you I'm sure, but I don't see where I'm on. But anyway, to me it seems like the most important thing is, well, not the most important thing, but an important thing is that everybody has the idea that everybody who wants to participate on the board wants to be there and wants the organization to succeed. So if you start from the idea that everybody who's there wants to participate, that might help eliminate some conflicts. But then there are always people, I've run into them, I'm sure everybody has, who are interested in being on the board because they think it's a feather in their cap or something like that. And that's not what you want in a board member. You want somebody who's dedicated to the organization and is there because they believe that the organization is important and that they have something useful to contribute.
Right, right. And so we have to differentiate between those folks whose motivation in being part of the board is indeed to foster the health of the organization versus their own personal standing. Is that right?
Yeah, that's basically what I'm trying to say. And then related to that is this idea that if you assume that everybody's there has something useful to say, then I think it's important that whoever is leading the board itself needs to be willing to listen to other opinions, which in today's society is becoming increasingly difficult to do. And we attribute all kinds of, wrong motivations to people sometimes. I mean, but it's easy to do when somebody disagrees with you. It's becoming more and more like it becomes a personal attack against you, as opposed to something that the person really has a strong feeling about. So it's hard to balance that because people can genuinely differ and have different ideas and approaches, and that's where conflict comes. So I think it's important to be able to manage that conflict, which is going to happen because everybody who's there, we assume, is interested in the board, but they just have different ideas, or organization. They have different ideas about how to get to where you want to go.
Right. And so the question becomes, how do we set the tone in the way that the board interacts when it's meeting, so that those differences can be discussed in the most productive and civil way possible? What has been your experience? I'm sure that occasionally you've had a board member who is perhaps a little bit more effusive, I will say, in the way that they offer their information or their opinions. And so how do we create a more equal footing for the interaction of the board members? Please, Bonnie, and unmute yourself, please. Bonnie, you're still muted.
It's okay. I would like to go back to your original question, if I might. When you onboard new members, which generally are recommended by current board members or staff of the organization, somebody that there's a personal connection, I think it's pretty important to help them to understand the mission of the organization. What are we doing? If you have 10 different program areas, make sure that the new member is familiar with that. They should be given like a booklet of what your responsibilities are, if there are different locations taken around, so they can really experience what their clients are are doing every day. I have been in meetings where somebody likes to talk to hear themselves. And I think it's incumbent upon the president to ask them politely to please pipe down, or to respect the 5-minute rule, if there is such a thing.
I like the idea of the 5-minute rule for sure. And you said a key word, and that is president. Um, uh, I am the founder of Arcadian Corral, and I've kind of been allowed to be the president of the studio. But I have understood that in order for my board to function productively, I have to shut up a lot. And at the same time, I have to kind of be the guide through the course of the conversation, so that I make sure that everybody feels that they're equally valued and everybody feels that they can contribute in a meaningful way. Sometimes that's easier than others, but I very much think that the president has to have that type of temperament. Jim, do you find that to be the case?
Yes, very much so. I agree with what Bonnie said, that it really does 100% fall to the president, right? To establish the tone of the meetings, to kind of ensure that like fair and equal conversation among everybody is happening. So I think whoever is in that position has to be somebody that is willing to both like Bonnie used the word, pipe down, right? If somebody's talking too much, but also be willing to bring out conversation and maybe people who are not speaking up. Invite their opinion. And when there is a difference of opinion, you just need somebody in that leadership role who knows how to allow that conversation to happen. That can be difficult because I don't know that is a learned skill really, or something that people just have innately the ability to do that. So I think the first thing to do is try to ensure whoever is in that leadership role on the board is somebody who is very comfortable and willing to be able to guide the conversation so that's productive.
Perfect.
Agreed. Absolutely. So let's say we have a president who has those qualities, and we are indeed fortunate in that case, right? And then let's say again we have to fulfill a certain position. I'm in that circumstance right now with Arcadian Corral. Our vice president decided to retire, and so right now there is no vice president, and I have to figure out how to fulfill that post and what that person was doing. So what criteria should I use in trying to recruit someone for that post? Because it's a key and essential one. If I get hit by a truck, somebody's got to take care of Arcadian Corral, yes? All right, so what criteria for the second in command do the three of you feel are most valuable?
Mm-hmm. I think just leadership skills, right? Somebody really, when you're talking about the vice president, I think you're looking for the same qualities that you look for in a president. Because you're 100% correct, Marina. They need to be able to step into that role. That's their main purpose, really. So I think you definitely want those leadership skills. Somebody who can, guide discussion, who can that's the wrong word, I'm sorry, who can bring out decisions, in a very diplomatic,
Democratic.
A democratic way, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I agree.
I'm sure Bonnie and Carol can jump in there too. I jumped in quickly. Sorry, guys.
That's fine. Thank you. I think you're quite right for the vice president's role. The same quality should be there. But I also have, in my experience, tried to have the existing board define the functions those core functions that we enumerated perhaps in my initial introduction, and then to be able to say how many of those functions do the folks on the board presently actually fulfill, and what is not being serviced yet. What skills do we not have on the board that need to be in some ways satisfied to make the board even more effective and more productive? And that conversation can be a spirited one as well, because again, people can perceive differently what the core needs are. So again, I guess my question to you is, how do you go about, each of you, trying to solicit other folks to join the board? Carol, what was your experience with anything like this?
Our biggest problem was trying to get people to serve on the board. Because, people, oh, well, so I think having defined roles, which you talked about earlier, for each position on the board, so that maybe you go in with most of those, core characteristics or leadership qualities in some way, quote unquote, covered. But it's not always easy to find people who are willing to serve. So, sometimes food helps. Snacks, good snacks, a glass of wine, maybe once in a while. Not too much, just because.
Oh, well, I think that gets down to a certain element called congeniality.
Right.
Why do we join any organization, right? As volunteers, especially, we do it because we find something enjoyable, and we find something that, in some way, satisfies our personal needs, for human interaction, and for feeling a sense of accomplishment. And so, if you can convince somebody that type of interaction and in their participation in a board is going to bring that type of reward, perhaps that does become an enhancement to ask them to do so. I know that oftentimes what I will do is, if I have a person who I think might fill the post that we need and bring the skills that we need at a given point in time, we will at first invite them to just sit in on a board meeting without making a commitment, so that they see how we do things and what our conversation is like, and therefore they get some sort of realistic understanding of what they would be buying into. Certainly, if there's a fiduciary part of the meeting, we make sure that is kept private. But the idea of being able to actually see what goes on backstage, in essence, right? In our choruses, our singers see us. We walk in, the conductor waves their hands, the music happens. It's all very, very straightforward, and it's kind of like a little bit of magic that occurs on a given weeknight. But what they don't see is all of the stuff that happens behind the scenes to make things actually happen. And that's what I think you need to share with a potential new board member. And also, I have found that when you invite somebody to do that, the present board members are very, very happy about that and willing to try to demonstrate to that person the value of what we're doing. It kind of raises the bar even a little bit more. And so that I believe is an important thing. And then the other thing that I really think is important is, all of you who have been in leadership positions, and I know the folks that I'm looking at who are participating today are in leadership positions. One of the main qualities, too, I think, of successful leadership is saying thank you.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Making sure that you cheerlead, right? You have to cheerlead people, and to some degree, it varies with the organization. Jim, you've done it on a corporate level, so have you, Carol, and certainly Bonnie as well. What's the difference between that type of cheerleading that takes place in a more corporate situation versus a community courses board? Have you perceived differences?
Definitely, I think there are differences. You know, in a corporate situation, there's often different motivators. You know, people are paid, or you know, there's other things that happening. I think when you get into kind of a community chorus situation, a community organization with a smaller board, I think the thank you becomes so much more important. I think the more often you do it, with not only board members but all of your volunteers, right? It just it goes so much further, I think, in a setting like a community chorus, and it really makes people understand their worth and that they're appreciated and willing to continue, you know, serving.
Right. I think that's really important because if they feel that their efforts have borne forth something positive and productive for the group, then they're very willing to continue in that role. And I think you're right. On the corporate level, there's a different tier of responsibilities and an understanding of who's doing what. In a community course, the word community is really the operative one. Mm-hmm. Right? It has to be such that we understand that we, the officers of the board, and I do mean not just the president, but the executive board in and of itself, needs to be that core group that continues that idea of achievement and outreach to the other members. So I guess my question is, in a community course, who should be the spokesperson from the board to the singing members? What is the right way to approach that relationship? And how does that come back and affect how the board operates?
Okay, I'd like to go back to your question about who to select for a vice president.
Okay.
Because most boards, all boards on which I've sat, have bylaws. And the bylaws state the roles of each, you know, president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. So it's just like you move up. So that is one thing. I think when somebody considers being on the board, they have to become an ambassador for the organization. And they have to be willing to say publicly through their friends in the community, boy, this is the greatest. I just can't get over how fantastic the quality of the music, the seriousness of the board, because it's a business after all. The whole thing is a business, and it should be run as a business with heart. Mm-hmm. And I think that, well, what was your last question, the most recent one?
How does the board interact with the chorus? What is the right way to do that?
I think they have to be leaders, but accessible to the group. They should verbally, you know, when they go to practice every single week or accept phone calls, always be there to answer any questions or problems that there might be. And if they can't solve the problem, they are a liaison between that member and the board. They should always be available. That's the word I would say.
Agreed. I think your word ambassador was very good. Carol, did you want to add?
One thing that the Monmouth Civic Chorus does that I think is really helpful is each board member, we alternate who is going to give announcements. So that person is in charge of announcements for that day. And of course, other people on the board can certainly speak to whatever, you know, issues they are addressing their particular role on the board, but that way everybody in the organization gets to know who's on the board, what their role is, and I think it makes it so that the members of the chorus or whatever can come to that person and feel a little bit more welcome. Their ideas are welcome.
That's good.
Because they've talked to them. I mean, or at least that person has talked to them during rehearsal or talked at them to rehearsal.
Right. I think that's a great idea because all too often the identity of the board can just be situated in the persona of the president. And the chorus is kind of has two figureheads, the music director and the president of the board. And you're right, then the chorus does not relate to these other functions and realize that there are other resources that other individuals can provide to them. So I think that's a great idea, and I think I'm going to steal it. Thank you very much.
That's good.
The question I have too is, what do you do? Let's see. We have a question. Of course, let me just find that here a second in the chat.
Yeah, we have a question.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
What should the chorus do with some non-singing board members who do not generally attend rehearsals?
Right. Good question.
So we have a couple of non-singing board members on the MCC board this year. And it does make it more difficult, right? Because they're not at rehearsals, seeing the members and everything. I think number one, it's important to try to get them to, like I know at the beginning of the season, we invited those non-singing members to several rehearsals, like the first 3 or 4. Number one, they had jobs to do that made it easier when they were present, but also it just introduces them to the members. They get to see the members and people get to know them. And then I think it's just important that they have some communication with the members throughout the season, even if it's not at rehearsal, if they're communicating via the newsletter or, making sure that they're putting stuff into the newsletters or into the weekly emails that we send out, for example, so that people are constantly reminded that they are on the board and, representing them as much as the singing members are.
I think that's very important, and you're fortunate. Actually, I think they have a few non-singing board members because they do bring perhaps a different perspective to things a little bit, which can be healthy. Sometimes we're so involved in the singing that we don't necessarily have the possibility of a wider vision, and so that I think is very fortunate. I'm curious. Does Monmouth Civic have live board meetings or Zoom ones like this?
We do a combination. Most of our meetings have gone back to in person.
Good.
Although we always send a Zoom link for those who can't attend in person. And then I think maybe 2 or 3 of our meetings in the year are fully on Zoom. So we kind of do a hybrid.
Right. And do you see a difference in the quality of the interaction in the board figures themselves because of the live meetings?
100%. My personal view, and I'm sure everybody has their own opinion. My personal opinion is that the board is much more, the conversations are much more productive when we are in person. I think it's just difficult over Zoom sometimes to really engage in productive discussion.
Agreed. The personal touch is very, very much what we are banking on as choral artists.
Right. Yes. You got that right.
We are banking on not being replaced by artificial intelligence. By being able to remind people that interpersonal contact is really at the core of what community means. And to the benefit of everybody, certainly. It's a difficult thing because once now that Zoom is a key part of how people do interact, it saves time for people not traveling back and forth to an actual meeting site, or even finding a neutral meeting site that everybody can go to comfortably. And so as a secondary possibility, I think it's certainly been useful. But if I can have a live board meeting, I'm happier.
Yeah.
I am for sure. I am for sure. Okay.
There are all kinds of things that get communicated in person that don't necessarily involve words that you can't really do on Zoom.
Now that's a really, really important thing. Picking up on other types of communication from people, and I think that very much affects the dynamic of a chorus for sure. But very much it affects the dynamic of a board, because if you're having a difference of opinion on something, you can, through that type of interaction, you can kind of begin to understand how wed someone is really to how strongly wed they are to their opinion, or whether they're more open to possible compromise, which is where we want to get to eventually, right? So being able to read those interpersonal signals becomes an important part of making a board function as productively as possible through difficult conversations, I think. Has that been your experience?
When I was on boards, we didn't have much Zoom because it was like, in the dark ages. So I can't speak to that. But I can speak to being in other kinds of meetings, Zoom and non-Zoom. And I think you can just, you just pick up vibes from people in a room that you just don't get.
That's
And
right.
also on Zoom, sometimes it's really easy for people to, go off and make coffee or not, fall asleep a little bit or whatever. So they're less likely to do that if they're in person.
Most likely, yes, that is true. The other question is that which I see a little bit from Sue, a board has to interact both with in the case of a community chorus, with staff, a musical director, possibly an executive director, and other folks that may fulfill technical duties for the group, and those people are paid. So, how does the board create a productive relationship with the staff part of an organization? What should the balance be between the two? Please, Bonnie.
I think that there is definitely a difference between this paid staff and the board. The paid staff, at least in the nonprofits that I have been involved with, kind of hold the board in awe, which may not be the case in a chorus. It's incumbent upon the board chair and the executive director to have constant conversation to keep the wheels greased between the two, the board and the staff. And I think generally the staff and the board have a very simpatico relationship, unless there is conflict abrew. But on day to day, without that, I think it's usually, the board feels an obligation to the staff, and the staff feels accountable, I should say, to the board.
I think that's true. I wear both hats. Because with Arcadian Chorale, I'm the chief bottle washer here. But I'm also the music director of Richmond Choral Society on Staten Island, and I have several of those board people here today, happily. which tells you what kind of a good board that is.
I would say.
But there, my hat is different. I'm the music director. I'm not a member of the board in that sense. And so I have learned a lot about just running Arcadian Chorale by having the interaction that I have with Richmond Choral in my other role, and understanding how they need to understand how I want to serve that mission, their mission, and building a bridge of trust between us.
There it is.
And that element of trust has to be certainly between the board and any staff, for sure. With a music director, it has to be there because you have to trust that the music director is knowledgeable and is shepherding the development of the organization in a way that is going to be appropriate for the organization as it presently exists.
And to grow it too.
And to grow it, absolutely. That's correct. At the same time, the music director has to be clear to the board about what they think the organization should not do. And sometimes every now and then there's that little bit of conversation that needs to take place that's a little bit greater. But trust is at the key. And I think that's a key element within boards as well. If you can trust the other board members, if you can trust to their level of commitment, if you can trust their productivity, then you're happier to be part of that organization, right?
Plus, that comes from mutual respect. Respect on the part of the board members as well as the staff members.
Correct.
If that respect is not there, then you're not going to have trust.
Absolutely. So how do we bring out a member of the board who is a little bit more in the background, but who we believe is well motivated, buys into the mission and all that? How do we make them a more productive person?
Good question.
Thanks.
I think it has to start with probably a one-on-one conversation with the board chair or president and that board member. I think you have to be willing to have those honest conversations. I think that builds the trust and respect that you were just talking about. And you just have that conversation and say, as president of this board, I need you to bring your skills. The reason we put you on the board, I need you to bring that to the board and speak out more. And then if they, ask for help on how to do that and all sorts of things, then you can, have the conversation from there over specifics to that person that might be helpful. But I think unless you have that one-on-one conversation, I think it's really hard to just try to do it in the throes of a meeting.
Yeah.
Personally.
Because I guess what we need to do is identify what particular part of what the mission is and the various duties, which of those things kind of jazzes that person, right? That is attractive to them.
Yeah.
That they would be happy to give their time and effort to.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because I do think sometimes there are people who sit on the periphery of a board. And while they are there and supportive, a lot of times they don't really do much.
Yeah.
And that's a problem because obviously you want them to be able to be better engaged, but at the same time, up to a certain point, they have not really been as productive as they might be for the health of the organization. And so I do think that is something that the executive board has to be very sensitive to and be very careful about cultivating as need be. And as you said, it has to be done first privately. Any conversation like that has to be separate, private, and then acted upon as the person's interests seem to come forward. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yes.
That's pretty good. What if you're on a board and you perceive that one of the officers is really not fulfilling their role. How should you deal with that? How should you deal with that? Please, Bonnie.
I would speak privately to the president. I wouldn't embarrass the person. It's not for general knowledge. But if I have a true concern, not, I don't like the person, but if I understand all the roles of the board, and I see that an officer is not fulfilling that, I would speak privately to the president and say, whatever you want to do, you do it because you're the president, but I have this major concern.
Yeah, I think that's the way to go. What if you perceive that the president is not doing their job?
Oh, Jim Scavone.
We never perceived that.
No, we
I
would
think-
never.
And honestly, I put that out just because
It happens.
it does happen occasionally. I think it's a bit rare, actually, I'm happy to say. But for example, I know of a non-for-profit in Manhattan, an arts group, where the artistic director really dictates everything to the board.
Oh,
And the board president has really been passive in allowing the board, the artistic director to just
ramrod.
run roughshod over everything and just get everything that they want, and that has resulted in certain problems because of overspending,
Mm-hmm.
making commitments that perhaps can't be kept. And so if I were on that board, I would need to try to find a way to deal with that president. And that's a difficult thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to start with a conversation with the president, right? As difficult as that may be, maybe two board members are more comfortable approaching it together.
I would say at
you
least
know,
two.
Yeah,
Probably, if you're feeling that way, I guess what I would do is, first of all, within the members of the board, I'd sort of feel out how other people are perceiving the situation. And if it's almost unanimous, then the board as a whole needs to go in some way to the president and say, we have this concern.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, that is the right path, certainly. In the case of the organization that I know of, they've been happy to allow the artistic director to rule, to have sway, and I think that they will have a rude awakening in the not too distant future because they have overextended themselves. So,
Yeah.
and Marina, I think that goes back to your previous discussion point about staff or artistic directors and boards, right? Is knowing what each person's role is and really making sure that we are sticking to those roles and responsibilities. The artistic director should not be running the board, obviously. And so again, that has to be part of the conversation as to the health of the organization if they are allowing that to happen.
Right, absolutely. A question came up in the chat just now, where some folks have had the unfortunate experience of someone on the board really interacting in a rather hostile fashion. What do you do about that?
I would say, again, it's the president's role. I mean, when you're a president, it's not fun and games all the time. You have to take it so seriously. And if the person is being hostile, I would just pull them aside and I would speak personally and not on the phone, not email, direct one-on-one that this behavior is unacceptable on this board. And you have a choice to either correct yourself or step off the board, and we'll respect it.
That's a good way to put it.
And I also think it's important to set the tone right from the very beginning, about how we interact as board members, how we respect each other, how we treat each other during meetings, so that when the situation develops, it's easier, I think, like Bonnie said, than to have that conversation and say, listen, at the very beginning of the season or whenever it was, we laid out these guidelines. Here they all are. You are not fulfilling these guidelines. You are not following these guidelines, and we need you to come on board, for excuse the pun, and get with the program, really.
No, you're absolutely correct. It does fall to the president, I do believe, and it also, as you rightly say, has to be done in a private fashion. I personally believe that type of standard has to be upheld within any organization, right? Within a community chorus, we have different personalities that we have to deal with all the time, and I find that both the board and the music director have to set certain fundamental rules of behavior.
Yep.
And interaction. And if you're willing to interact positively, then you're very welcome to be there. And if you're not, then you'll need to find another group. That's all. You know. Let me ask this other question. Since the three of you have had experiences with non-musical boards, non-chorus boards, what is something that the board of a community organization, like a community chorus especially, needs to learn from a board that's more corporately oriented? What do nonprofit boards not do well enough that they could learn to do, or should be paying attention to more, that corporate boards do?
I can't answer that.
That's a great question.
I don't know. I can't.
Not sure.
One thing I would say is, I see a lot of community organizations who I think sometimes their boards, because let me frame it this way. I think a lot of community organizations, like community choruses, our boards, we don't have big staffs. So our boards sometimes have the responsibility of a lot of the day-to-day activities of the organization, right? Whereas a larger corporation, they have big staffs that are doing all those things. And the boards really can focus on strategic planning and safeguarding the mission, right? When we get into smaller community organizations, and I think this is very true, I'll speak personally about MCC, I see a lot of times the boards get stuck in the minutia of the day-to-day operations of the organization. And they are not, therefore nobody is really safeguarding the mission or doing the strategic planning. So I think the one thing that we can learn is that although those day-to-day functions have to happen, and like is the case with Monmouth Civic Chorus, we put that on our board members. They all have responsibilities for different areas of the chorus. What has to happen at a board meeting is that stuff cannot take over the strategic planning and the long-term visioning that needs to happen from a board perspective.
Right. I think that's a very good distinction, because again, as you rightly say, community courses don't have paid staff, or it's to a small extent. And therefore, again, those day-to-day responsibilities can become, they can obscure the vision toward the mission. And
right.
It's periodic reevaluation, which again, I think is really a healthy thing to do as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. That's an important thing to realize.
Sometimes I think interpersonal relationships among people who may not even be on the board, but other people become too sensitive about stepping on toes because they think that it's going to get to the other person, that it can blow up to a big mess. And then the problem never gets resolved because there's this basic interpersonal relationship between two people who may be on the board, may not be on the board, but they are not. It becomes, I think, especially with a community organization, difficult to identify that particular problem and bring it to the attention of someone who can resolve it.
I think that's a very good point, Carol.
Yeah.
I mean, on a corporate board, you ultimately have, being fired, right? If the people are not doing their job, and we can't do that.
And fire. No.
That is a big distinction, definitely. Another issue I think that often comes up on boards, especially long-lived organizations, several of which are represented here today. Some of boards do have dedicated members who have served on the board for a good number of years, either in various functions of the executive board or as a regular board member. And when certain initiatives are brought up, you will hear those folks say, "Oh, we tried that and it never worked before."
Yeah.
Right.
Or they'll say, "Oh, we always do it this way. We never do it that way."
Mhm.
So what do we do with those folks?
I think it goes back to the bylaws
Mm,
and term limits. If you have 3 or 4 or whatever term limits you have, the new blood is what keeps a board vibrant.
mm.
And not those that have, well, we've done it my way. My way is the only,
Mhm.
Right. My way or the highway, as they say. Yeah. That does become an issue again. And a lot of times the people who have been on the boards for a good number of years are there because they are so completely invested in the course. There's no two ways about it. Their dedication is unquestionable,
Yeah.
but they can get stuck into a little bit of a rut.
Yes, they can.
And
Yes, please.
the other thing is, I mean, if you have people that have been on the board too long, you're not growing the organization as a whole, because at some point that person who you've been relying on for, however many years, many years, is not going to be around. I mean, let's face it, that's the reality. Something is, you, Marina, mentioned earlier, the start, you could get run over by a truck. Well, that kind of is a laugh, but it also happens. I mean, for whatever reason, right? They get sick, something, or they're not able to function for a number of months or whatever. So, and then there's nobody to take over because they haven't been, nobody else has been involved in that role to know what is,
Too early.
from the inside, what it's like.
Right. And so you're right that the energy of a board really does come from new blood. I totally do subscribe to that for sure. And therefore, one of the challenges I think of any board is trying to forecast and plan in advance for that type of eventuality. That is absolutely true. Looking at your organization and trying to ferret out who could be a potential leader and therefore might be invited to participate in the board. And again, what skills do they bring that would enhance the organization standing? That has to be a constant, I do believe. I've told the Arcadian board, every rehearsal you go to, you got to keep your eyes open. and see, how they feel about the group and what type of what kind of vibes you get from them. I think that's absolutely true. See, there's an issue of entrenchment also there. That could be. The comment was made is if there are entrenched board members, it may dissuade others who might join in to not, right? Because they perceive that there's a little club going on of some kind, right? Now, obviously, to some degree, organizations can be challenged by either the size of the group or the nature of the group in and of itself. You don't want to, I guess, get to a point where you feel you don't want to make that person who's been there forever to feel like they're no longer valuable, right?
Marina, so that my question was actually about the idea that on boards where people feel like, if I sign up for you, I can kiss the rest of my life goodbye. And that's where term limits can be helpful. We implemented that with the chamber singers because people were like, I've done that. I'm not doing that again.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then Sue wrote, a board member should identify an heir apparent who can learn their responsibility. That is a really, really very smart thing to do. We recently had to do that here at the consortium. Sue, do you want to talk about the secretary's position here at the consortium?
Well, the secretary, takes minutes, and our secretary that we had for many, many years rotated off the board. But before she did that, I, spoke to Fiona, and she agreed to be the new secretary.
Right. So Sue was very astute in understanding that our secretary of many years, who was absolutely wonderful, but who had served well and long, that it was her time for her to retire. And she was able to understand that Fiona could be a resource for us, and happily enough, bring that to fruition. And so, Fiona, we're really happy that you're doing this. Thank you very much.
And I was, I do grants for my chorus, and I identified a chorus member and began to train her and have her, prepare parts of the grants so she could be ready to take over if I can't do it at some point.
That is so smart. So then maybe a board that is forward looking has to have especially its executive members, do exactly that. Create an apprentice who can start to buy into the functions of the organization. Does anybody else do that? Do something like that? And by the way, anybody can answer now, please. Okay. All right.
Marina, this question, does the board have any influence on repertoire?
Uh-oh.
Yeah, uh-oh.
Go ahead. Anybody want to answer that one?
The answer to that is that the music director it is the one who decides. Period. I feel that music directors should function as a benevolent monarchy, listening to all opinions, because there may be some truth in what a suggestion that's given. But if you know that you cannot do the Verdi Requiem, you should not do the Verdi Requiem.
Exactly. That's quite right.
Right.
I like to call myself the benevolent dictator, though.
Oh, well,
Marina, I'll just speak from our perspective too at MCC. I think right now we have a very good relationship with our artistic director. We have a music committee. So I guess typically what happens is the artistic director and the music committee meet. They don't really discuss specific repertoire, but they talk in more general terms. They talk about, major works versus it's just a conversation about in a very high level conversation, I will say. And then our artistic director comes back with suggested repertoire for the season based on that conversation. So while the artistic director still maintains that control over the repertoire, like was just stated, he's getting the opinion of of the music committee. And also then the board needs to look at it in terms of finances, right? You know, in our situation, we can't do 3 huge orchestra concerts a year. We just can't support that financially, and our venues are limited and all those sorts of things. So I think it has to be a real back and forth conversation about repertoire. Once the artistic director has the repertoire defined, then the board needs to jump in and talk about the reality of it and how are we going to make this all work.
Agreed. Speaking as an artistic director, I think that you've enumerated well that type of interaction. I tend to think of myself as a parent. I have to know how to feed and nourish my child, right?
Right.
And I have to know what its diet requires and what it's capable of doing and how high it can jump and all of those things in choosing repertory. But then I need to be able to convince and explain to the board why I've made the choices I've made and have them trust my opinions and hopefully my passion for certain music. I never, ever bring forward works that I can't find some sort of passion for. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's really, really a key thing. And so that dynamic between a board and a music director in community choruses is a very, very essential one, of course, and needs to be cultivated by all members of the board. And in response, so does the music director have to be clear with their vision and their recommendations, for sure. That is absolutely true. I think I'm going to open up the floor if anybody else would like to ask a question or make any comments. Does this ring a bell with the things that you've experienced on in your courses, in your boards? Is there anything that we haven't mentioned today that has been on your mind? We've covered everything. No.
This is Caroline. I just I made a comment in the questions, but there's been a lot of, our board acts more to run the organization, not more as an advisory board. Is that typical of most boards?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a fine line then, because if the mission of your organization is to provide the community an opportunity to sing in the chorus and provide concerts, then you're always meeting the mission of the group, right? Once you're providing concerts, right? So the whole idea of a kind of think tanking as a board is really, it's more of a business, like trying to run the business, you know, and get enough money, get the right venue, have the music kind of thing, right? So it's more of a administrative board than a board of directors. Am I understanding this correctly?
Well, I think your mission is not just let's sing. Every chorus in the universe is let's sing, but to sing what, to sing why, to sing for whom, and that may change over time. And so in the middle of all these day-to-day administrative jobs, the board, you know, needs to be thinking about that mission and how it can be best carried out.
Yeah, Caroline, I'm sorry. I would just add to that. So again, MCC's board, I think, is the same as yours, right? Where all of our board members are running the day-to-day operations. They're doing the marketing, or they're, you know, planning the venues and production and that whole side of it. Again, I will say, I think as a board, those day-to-day operations cannot overshadow the board's responsibility of the mission and making sure the values and its fiduciary responsibility, which we didn't really talk about today, right?
Right.
We have to make sure that all those things are happening despite all the day-to-day things happening on the side. So like at our board meetings, if there's day-to-day things that need to be discussed, we put those at the very end so that we make sure our focus is on the bigger picture and our fiduciary responsibilities and all of that sort of thing. And then if somebody needs to talk to the board about something going on with their day-to-day activities, then we'll bring that up at the end to make sure that we have time to focus on the other stuff.
Well, it just seems like our our meetings are typically about getting the concerts put together. We don't, there doesn't appear to be much opportunity, or actually we struggle to get those things done. We're having enough trouble pulling together the pieces to get enough money to pay for instrumentalists or pay for rental of halls or get the membership stuff together, order music, whatever else we're doing. I'm not sure how to move to the next level without leaving, because there is no choir if this other stuff doesn't happen. And I've often felt that sometimes I think the members of the choir just sort of think this falls out of the sky someplace. But, you know, that's just a frustration of being behind the scenes and trying to pull this all together. I just wasn't sure if other choirs struggled with this.
Oh, I think absolutely they do. Because let's face it, we're all, for the most part, I don't know everybody's chorus, but for the most part, we're small organizations, right? So I think almost everybody struggles with that. And I think, you know, sometimes it's baby steps. You say, okay, we're going to set aside 15 minutes at every meeting to not talk about the day-to-day stuff, and you start there. Or maybe you establish a very small process that allows 2 or 3 of those day-to-day things to happen outside of the meeting, you know, between 1 or 2 people or something like that. You have to start small, and then, you know, give yourself lots of credit for those very small steps.
So with my board,
Go ahead, Elaine.
Oh, what I found is that until recently, my board only wanted to meet every 2 months, and it was impossible to change that. But there was a gridlock because so many issues came about that it was impossible to get anything done just while everybody got their issues on the table. So I had been recommending that we meet once a month for 1 hour on a particular topic. And the topic of the month will be, you know, whatever I've decided it's going to be, or that they've decided, you know, something is coming up. We now have a grant chairperson, and she gets to speak and, you know, practically lead the meeting, really, because she is in control. She knows what she's doing, and she can explain it better than anyone else. If we have, there are issues that come up all the time: how to run the meeting, how to, not the meeting, how to run the concerts, I'll put it plural, how to sell the tickets, how to do the publicity. So therefore we formed a publicity committee. Now they have gotten organized and can run by themselves and report in. So part of the minutes, part of the procedure is that there will be small reports from these other committees, and the big topic of the month would be whatever we feel it should be, as it comes along.
I think that was a very good solution to your problem of meeting every 2 months, which is not
driving me crazy.
That was a good approach to solving that issue.
If I could add something just to that as well.
Thank you.
One of the things that we've tried to do in our chorus, I'm with the Greater South Jersey Chorus, and we've had kind of an explosion in membership, which is very exciting. So we now have a bigger pool of people to draw from, and we've really been strengthening our committees and trying to get our committees more active and tackling the minutia and all of the things that would tie up our board in knots a lot. And every board member is now a liaison to a committee, but they're not necessarily running the committee. So we've been able to get more people involved at that committee level, and that is starting. It's a long, slow process, because for so many years we were doing all of the nuts and bolts things that people are talking about here, but we're starting to have some separation now and being able to focus more on the director side of things, baby steps. But the building up of our committees and giving them the responsibilities and then letting them go do what we've asked them to do and report back to the board has been a big step for us.
That sounds terrific. That sounds terrific. Congratulations on
Great.
that. You know, the separation between losing sight of mission and the day-to-day necessities can indeed be an issue. And Jenny wrote in that oftentimes a chorus will have separate planning meetings, just again to get back in touch with the mission and to plan the organization's artistic and fiscal life for the next, couple of years. Usually, Richmond Choral Society does that in January each year. We have a planning meeting, and that sets us up for at least about a good year and a half or so into the future, which you have to be able to do if you're looking at venues and budgets and artists and all that you need to do. And most of the times in those planning meetings, the day-to-day minutia is reduced quite a bit, so that we can deal with the true mission and core activities of the chorus. So that is another way to approach that as well. Any other questions? Any other comments? I think we've covered a lot. I think we've been able to come to terms with the fact that being on a board, running a board, is a tremendous challenge. And yet at the same time, it can be tremendously rewarding once you get that board really functioning in the way that you want it to. I have found that part of what makes the board successful is having people that are going to do what they say they're going to do. Right?
Absolutely.
When people are productive that way, when you can trust that when somebody takes on a responsibility that they're going to follow through, wow, that is absolutely terrific. And then you get a lot more done. Then I think the board members themselves respect each other, because they can see that each of them is in some way contributing in a meaningful way. And you're right, one of the things that we didn't touch on in any explicit way today was the fiduciary side of a board. And maybe that's another seminar that we have to have. Because
Sure.
I think the idea of what is the financial burden of a particular board member, how we go about finding the money to do all the things that we do. The idea of give or get, of course, is usually the case on higher level boards. On community chorus boards, it can be much, much more straightforward. And so maybe that's a good topic for a continued conversation. I think that could actually be a very good topic. So perhaps it's time to wrap it up. I want to first of all thank our wonderful panelists, Jim and Carol and Bonnie, for doing a wonderful, wonderful service to us today. So thank you all very, 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 very much.
And if anyone has, a situation on your board right now, the panelists and Marina would be happy to speak with you, and you can reach out to them via Chorus Connection.
Absolutely. The other thing I'll ask you to keep your eyes open for is that the Choral Consortium is going to offer a fabulous workshop on March 22nd. We're going to offer a workshop called Voice Activated. This will be a live workshop on vocal production, and it will be it will be led by Kalen Marcel Manson. He is quite a guy. He is the head of the voice department at Bard College. He is the professor of music practice at Clark University, the artistic director of the New England Repertory Orchestra. He conducts operas, and he is a fabulous baritone, and he is so funny. He is great. So Richmond Choral Society brought him to do a workshop last spring, and it was
wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. It was one of the best things we've ever done. And happily enough, he's agreed to come down in March to do this for the consortium. And we're actually going to offer this in collaboration with the organization, which is the parent organization for all of the choirs in the Greek Orthodox community. And so the event is going to be held at Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Church in Westfield, which is right in the center of the state. And we will be sending out information about that in about a week. So please, once you get that information, if you could spread the word to your singers, I think everybody would be absolutely thrilled. They should go to this because he's that good. And I don't say that about many voice teachers. So please keep your eyes open for that. And then for the open sing in June, we are contemplating programming the Fourier Requiem and some other goodies. And we'll be letting you know about that sometime soon as well.
Marina,
Okay.
is the March 22nd, that's the free workshop, yes?
No, it's not. Because
Okay.
when Richard McCorrell offered the workshop, they got a very handsome
Grant.
from the city of New York.
Right.
We have no grant. So we are going to ask, the pre-registration is $20 only.
Okay.
It's a brown bag lunch. At the door, it's $25. Money well spent, trust
Yeah.
me. This guy is
Yeah.
worth every penny and much more. So I hope that you will spread the word once the event is live, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
The other thing is this, you can see that the consortium is trying to do good things for this state of New Jersey, for our art form. We could use a couple more board members. So if you know of anybody who might be interested, please let them contact Sue. We'll be happy to let them sit in on one of our next board meetings, which are always entertaining, and see what we do in the background as well. So I want to thank our board members also for their work in putting this together. We are a very good, tight and efficient organization as well, and we have a lot to be happy about. So thank you all, and I wish you well for your spring seasons. Let's make music and have some fun too, okay? Thanks a lot.